The next presentation is from Andrew Nimmer. Andrew, as Murray has said, is a partner with his wife, Annabelle, in the architectural firm Lars Nimmo, which has, over the years, won huge numbers of awards and has specialised, in part, in educational architecture and planning. So Andrew is going to talk about the campus, but also about a couple of buildings.
Thanks, Sue. And thanks Jim, for all that background information. So this is what the campus looked like in 1959. So were you still then there, Jim, or you'd gone? Okay. So the old main building is there, but not much else. The thing with University of New South Wales started very late compared to some of the other universities. So Sydney University, mid-1800s, and they were the kind of sandstone universities, Melbourne University, Queensland University, and they were built along sort of neo-Gothic lines, beautiful sandstone buildings, beautiful grounds, very much in the English model of university, and like the Ivy League universities of the USA. But University of New South Wales, of course, was a post-World War II university, so that's a time of great boom, and but very little materials, lots of shortages. So it was kind of always the austerity campus, and that was its life for the first, I'd say, 20 years of its time. But it was a time of enormous expansion too. So if you think of the campus starting in around about the mid-50s, by 1966, so first decade of its life, this is what the master plan looked like. And really the whole bones of the campus are there. They're already in place, including the upper campus. And if you know the university, you can recognise a lot of those silhouettes as buildings that are still here. And in amongst those buildings, the old main building, the very first building there. So the photograph on my right is actually the opening of that building in 1955. That's attributed to the government architect, Cobden Parkes. Here we have the Dalton Building up the top, 1957. Dalton Building's still here. It's a lovely building, very elegant and modernist. And those two images up the top of the tiles, there are some beautiful glass mosaic tiles in there, which also are still preserved by Douglas and Unn. They're well worth digging out and having a look at if you wander through that building. Heffron Hall, built in 1962. Both those buildings are also attributed to the government architect. Down the bottom on the right, Goldstein Hall, 1964. Again, government architect. That one actually is the first Silverman Medal winner out here. So we're sort of moving from the late sort of 50s post-World War modernist buildings to more of your Sydney School, nuts and berries type architecture. And then Clancy Hall, 1970. The beginning of a whole range of what you'd call brutalist architecture on the campus. So during this time, the emphasis was on the buildings. It was about getting buildings built. It wasn't really on the space between the buildings. It wasn't about the public domain. And you can see from those photographs, the individual buildings were actually, some of them were quite handsome, and you could take some, this is a Max Dupayne photograph, you could take some lovely photographs of them. But the reality was something different. It was something like this. So this one you can see the Matthews Building and the second stage of the Menzies Library being built, the towers. So that would have been probably mid-70s, that photograph, I would guess. And right up until the mid-80s, this is what the campus felt like, a series of buildings floating in tarmac, floating in car parks, and that was the space. Now, I'm just going to read you I wrote an article, which is sort of what led to all this. I wrote an article in 2001 for Architecture Australia about the evolution of the campus, because it's not like that now. It has changed. And this is thanks, Sue. This is a short extract from that article. So after a protest meeting, that's 1987, the Australian actually published in an editorial that the University of New South Wales is generally agreed to have Australia's ugliest campus. So that was published in a national newspaper. So that sort of instigated some action, because that was pretty embarrassing. So after a protest meeting in February 1987 that was pushing for major improvements to the physical environment of the campus, a delegation approached the then Chancellor, Justin Gordon Samuels, who set up the Campus Design Advisory Group. The group developed a number of campus principles, which would in turn form the basis of the future campus development strategy prepared by David Chesterman. So that's the first real master plan for the site of Jackson Tees, Chesterman Willis. The principles recommended that buildings in the future be sited to enhance opportunities for north-facing landscape courtyards, that cars be removed from the central part of the campus to the periphery, that the axial vista from Anzac Parade be properly developed, and that a pedestrian network be established throughout the campus that would link the landscape courtyards and open spaces. Support from changes was coming from the highest level. So those principles are pretty basic fundamental principles, and those principles are what's been instigated, and that's what's led to so much change. But the way Chesterman put together the master plan, I think, is very clever. So I'm just going to quickly go through that. Chesterman assembled a diverse team that included professionals beyond the obvious design and planning disciplines. Preparation of the plan was preceded by a series of workshops to ensure that the various stakeholders became involved and committed to the process of transformation. The workshops did not focus just on the physical environment, but looked at the broader aspects of what kind of a campus it would be and how it meshed into the regional locality. By the time of the current Vice-Chancellor, John Nyland, so this was 2001, John has now moved on, of course, the campus development strategy was already in place and endorsed by the University Council. It was up to Nyland to implement the Chesterman plan, which he has with an extraordinary vigour. Nyland, more than any other, seems to understand that great university requires a great campus, and that to attract the very best students and corporate sponsors, you need to be a great university. As the chair of the Campus Development Committee, which included Glenn Murcutt, David Chesterman and Professor Paul Reed, he oversaw all aspects of urban quality and urban design, with the guidance of the design professionals on the committee. The debate within the committee was often open and at times like a design forum where robust discussion between the presenting designers and committee was encouraged. So, up here you see the beginnings of the master plans. The one on the far right was the first Chesterman master plan in 1990, updated in 98, a further update in 2002, and then the current master plan, which Sue was part of the team that put that together in 2005, which sort of formed the basis of the DCP as well in 2007. And this is good planning, is that around about every 5 to 10 years you do a new master plan. You don't throw out what you started with, it evolves. And it's probably around about time for another one, I would imagine. But it's an evolving thing, and the strength of the master plans since the very first one is that they've built on those basic, simple principles rather than trying to go back to the drawing board. I've actually got this. This is the second master plan, the 1998 one. I brought it along because it's just such a simple, tiny little document, but within it are some very wise diagrams and some wise words. So this drawing in particular I love because it's almost childlike, but within that are all the concepts that have established the new campus. And the first thing you notice as an architect, there's not a single building drawn there. It's all about the spaces. It's about the spaces between the buildings, about how they work and what they are. So you can see the big yellow strip, which is the mall, being reinforced as this formal space through the campus, which every campus needs. And at one end you've got Anzac Parade, at the other end you had Scientia, which didn't exist when this was first drawn, but it suddenly said, well, we need a building like Scientia because there's your ceremonial space, you need a ceremonial building. Then there's the wiggly line, which is the pedestrian route, the campus walk, so that you don't always have to go up and down this formal mall. You can also wander and meander through the campus, and it links all the courtyards and spaces throughout. So and that also gives you your accessible route because the campus is over upper campus and a lower campus. Not easy to navigate it in terms of levels if you're in a wheelchair, but with that university walk through a combination of ramps and lifts, you can make your way up through the campus for everyone. Very important. And then a series of open spaces and how they relate to each other. Oh, the other thing there, of course, is you can see the boxes with P on them. All the car parking being taken out of the centre to the periphery and put into high-rise. And then understanding that there are a series of activity zones. So again, not looking at the buildings, even though the buildings generate these activities. The emphasis is on the activities and what happens around them and their relationship to open space. The campus, it's a big space, so you need to break it up into a series of precincts. And each precinct had a very different feel to it. Different part of the campus, the topography was different, the functions were different, the relationship to what was nearby was different. So you start to let those precincts and what's in those precincts guide how you approach the design. So all that was in the master planning as well. This one, another very simple diagram. The big yellow bit in the middle is what universities do, lots of teaching and research. Put your parking on the edge, and put your residential on the edge, so they all feed back into the middle. And this diagram, again, really simple diagram, but it's all about the emphasis on pedestrian movement, because prior to that was all about the motor car and where the motor car could park. Suddenly now the emphasis is how do people get around? And it's the linkages between your obvious routes and your courtyards and all that sort of thing. And then you end up with a diagram like this, which is your drawing of the overall. What's interesting here is that there's a series of, you can't really see it very well, there are a series of buildings there that didn't exist when this was done, which have got big red lines around them, and they're all positioned and made, and they're positioned to make spaces, making courtyards, making outdoor spaces, making north-facing spaces. So it's actually not about as an architect, it's flipping it upside down. The buildings aren't what's important. It's the space between the buildings and how you arrive to the buildings, that's what's important. So from the pedestrian's point of view. And that was the brilliance of this. Very simple, but it's all about making spaces. So even on the north side of the old main building, it understood that raggedy edge with the courtyards wasn't a great way of dealing with a very formal space like the mall. So it needed a building along that edge. It didn't matter what the function was, but what it did, it needed a form there to make that into a formal space. So this diagram fills in all the gaps. The quadrangle building up there, again, its shape is designed, to make two major outdoor spaces and then to link into the Heffron building and to link into another building. So it's almost a diagram devoid of its function, but understanding how you're making space, the outdoor space. And that's the genius of this diagram. Okay, so that's the bit of the history of where the campus got to. Like I said, I'm concentrating mainly on the Chester one because that was the big shift, the big change to this campus. So we've been doing a lot of work out here for probably the last 15 years. I'm just going to take you through two of the buildings. So the first one, the Low-Grade Cancer Research Building, which we did with some friends of ours up in Queensland, the Wilson Architects. On the upper campus, the big yellow dot is the biomedical precinct, and the green outline there is the Low-Grade Cancer Building. So it was positioned over an existing car park facing onto High Street, and Michael Burt Courtyard on the other side. So we were invited to do a limited competition for this, which we won. The second stage of it is the redevelopment of Wallace Worth, which is right next door of it, and part of our competition was actually proposing how that would be done as well. We were quite a small firm at the time, so it was a bit of a coup getting invited to do it, and even bigger coup to win it. I think there are a few large firms who are a little bit surprised by that, but we pulled it off. Anyway, we approached it by building up the diagram, is how we do the design. So in a research laboratory, you start with your research, your labs, where the researchers do their work. They sit at the lab and they do their work. Next to that, you have a series of support spaces. And this is where a lot of the equipment is, the incubators, the freezers, the fridges, some incredibly expensive bits of machinery. They sit off to the side and they're doing stuff that they keep referring to. Then because it's a biomedical research type space, you're often dealing with some nasties that you don't want to get out or other things to get in. So you need to control your ventilation floor by floor rather than having a central one. So the idea was having floor by floor plant, which also gives you maximum flexibility if you want to change what's happening in various laboratories. And then the last one we call the human strand, and this is the fun bit, because the labs need to be very, very rigid, very structured, because there's a lot of money tied up there in terms of equipment, but it does rotate over time, and you've got to allow that rotation to happen. So it needs to be very, very flexible. The write-up space is where they leave the lab, and that's where they sit down to write up their research. It's where they have meetings, where they collaborate, where they have lunch, and that's where the fun stuff happens. And the researchers will tell you that it is true that in those spaces, when you're out of the lab, sometimes the real ideas will come when you're discussing it with other people and collaborating. So it's those bits are the fun bits. That's sort of the more organic bit because that's about the people. One of the first sort of sketch we did where we took that idea of the various bits of the building, the lab strand through the middle, the support space on one side, and then this human strand, which we said, well, because that can be flexible, that becomes more interacted with the existing landscape. So it's pushed and pulled around by existing mature trees. And it plugs into the Wallace building, because that was part of the brief, but also pops out onto High Street to say hello, to say that there are people in this building. So this became, developing that diagram a little bit further, you can see where the word C25 is. That was the lab strand in the middle. Wrapping around it was the support spaces and plant. And then the more free-form space is the human strand, which, as I said, joins into Wallace Worth. The other thing we're very keen on is because we've been working out here for quite a few years, we understood the natural desire lines of the site and where people wanted to move around. And with the biomedical precinct, there's obviously a very strong link to the hospital and a lot of people moving up and down between the two facilities. So there's a very natural desire line right at the corner of Botany Street and High Street. And we wanted to have the building kind of reinforce that and set that up as much as possible. So the idea was that the new building with its human strand would make this new gateway as a whole new entrance to the campus. But also we were hoping to demolish a little bit of the Wallace Worth building just to make that a little bit more dramatic for that entry point. The idea of the science knowledge bank. These days, if you go back to laboratories perhaps 50, 60 years ago, they were very, very secret. They were hidden away and poor old scientists would work in artificial light all day long. Now it's the exact opposite. They want to see outside, but they also want to show everyone what they're doing. And given so much research, you need benefactors to give you money. You want to be able to show it to them as well. So the idea that your knowledge is on display and you can see what's going on. People are interested in that and the scientists are happy for that as well. So that was a big part of the design. So this is a perspective we did during the competition process, which kind of captures a lot of those things. This idea that the ends of the laboratories are very open and visible, that there is this human strand that links into the other building as well. The ground floor plan at the time of the competition, which shows a full layout for the Wallace Worth building as well. And you can see how we've sort of eroded that corner as much as possible to create a new entry. And the upper levels, where the darkest colour represents the support spaces, the next colour the lab strands, and then the human strand, the lighter colour. And we kind of just ran it straight across the buildings. It wasn't how it ended up being built, but very similar. So the first part of the project was to build the Lowy Cancer Research Building, which is this one, and this is the actual final plan that got built, and you can see it hasn't really changed that much. How am I going, Sue? 18. Okay, good. It hasn't really changed that much from the original competition, which is nice. It grew a lot in size, but the basic principles of the design stayed in place, which I guess is reassuring because it makes you feel that your original thoughts about the design were perhaps on the right measure. So the final building, the human strand, is represented by this loose green strip, which is full of people who are in their office spaces and talking and chatting and writing up. It wraps right around the Michael Burt courtyard, and the idea of the green to some extent is almost the feeling of the green grass of Michael Burt rolling up the side of the building and with the reflective glass as well. And you can see how we get that double height space at that corner to try and create this new entry and gateway space into the campus. And that's a public space, it's never shut off, so anyone can come in and go out. There's no gate or anything there. To High Street, it has a much more formal presence. At ground level there, that's one of those spaces where there's, if you've ever been there around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there are several hundred students there waiting to catch a bus. So you really didn't want to have the building. Usually we try and activate buildings at ground level. This is not a place to be activating a building because it would have been fighting with the students. So we really just let the building have its support space along there, so there's no direct activation, then let the trees be the nice existing mature trees be the backdrop. But the other thing that was important was the human strand, the green bit that it pops out, squeezes out onto the street just to say, yes, hello to everyone. Inside, the green continues. a atrium space that extends the full height of the building, and there's the end window straight into the laboratory spaces. So the atrium goes from the ground level with the skylight at the top, and you can see that direct link between the lab spaces and this breakout space. The labs have to be, they're heavily controlled. These are PC2 labs, so they've got a controlled entry, controlled everything. You can't just wander in there, otherwise goodness knows what you'd be spreading. So these meeting spaces that plug into Heffron, that's where very similar to this, the idea this is where the staff kitchenettes are, this is where people can gather and talk, it's where they have their lunch, and with a bit of luck, that might be where a eureka moment happens as well. So we then went on to do the Wallace Worth development, the second stage of it, which was wonderful. So the existing Wallace Worth building, you can kind of see underneath that, had a long wing facing onto the Lowy building, and then a shorter wing facing on to Botany Street. And the aim was to maximise that footprint on Botany Street as well. So the ground floor plan, we didn't unfortunately get to demolish that corner of the building. I still think it was a mistake, but I do understand that it's difficult to convince people to spend money to lose space. So we didn't quite get our grand entry. But the important of the linkage for students, for people wandering through the building and how they get around, very important. So through the middle of the Wallace Worth building, that becomes, we call it like a street. It's where lots of activities and meetings go on. So this building has teaching in it as well. The Lowy was all research, so it's a fairly closed building. This one has 2 levels of teaching down below, so it has a much more of a, I suppose, active life to it too, which is nice. The upper levels, which then move from teaching into the research laboratories, much more closed access there, but again, that important linkage with the Lowy's research building, which link lift core to lift core. So you can control your security access in that way. Okay, thanks. So inside the main atrium space, so the original Wallace Worth was one of those buildings built in the 60s, probably not one of the better ones, but it's interesting, a lot of the old medical students still had fond memories of it. So the fact that we actually preserved and kind of reinterpreted that originally external facade within the new building, which again is not dissimilar to what's happening here. At the opening, there were actually a few people came up and said they quite liked that. They liked the fact that we hadn't tried to hide it or totally reclad it, we just actually restored it. Facing onto Botany Street, we've actually got a mixture of office space and laboratory space, which gives you certain issues because a lot of your support space in the laboratories has very strict controls in terms of natural light that can get in there because it upsets the experiments they're doing. So a lot of the lab support spaces have a mixture of colour-back glass, which actually lets no light in, or these fairly intense louvers that have very controlled light entry. Whereas at the other end of the building, the northern end, more office space, so you obviously want more glass for people to look out on, which actually then starts to give you a diagram for how you might express the elevation of the buildings. The bottom 2 levels being your student teaching spaces, the upper levels being office space and laboratory, and you can see the more intensive array of colour-back glass where the lab support areas are. And then a little bit of play with different colours to the precast fins, so that what could very easily have been a big dumb box starts to become a little bit of a delight for the street, hopefully. The atrium, very important part of it because that's where all the socialising occurs, a lot of the meeting and activity. So created a large one in the Wallace Worth as well. With the teaching spaces, again, we don't hide them away anymore. There absolutely is no reason why a lecture theatre or a lecture hall can't have a great big glass window facing into a public corridor. They never used to, but they can, and that makes for a much nicer space. The modern teaching space now, so the old days of the didactic learning where the teacher sat at the front like we are here and just spoke to you and you took notes and that was it, and I gave the same lecture year after year after year. It's changed now, and this is active learning where the students sit around in cohorts of say 9 people. They might then break into smaller cohorts of 3. They're around computers and screens. They're sharing information across those screens. The teacher sits in the middle console so that students are all around, and that teacher can constantly move around to see what they're doing, can pull up someone's screen from their computer and put it onto the main screen, surrounded with whiteboards. And this is how teaching and learning is done these days, and it's a much better approach. They get far more out of it. And I think I'm nearly done. Prac classes, I mean, they do all sorts of things in there. They drop people up and things like that, some stuff you just don't want to know about. But it's these public areas where the researchers come together that's really, really important. Again, this area, it's like this space, it's just a public space, it's got the staff kitchenettes out there, and you're looking straight into the laboratory as well. Thank you very much.